All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for our Earth Day webinar 2022 focused on students. My name is Eileen Bookestein, and I am the Environmental Education Coordinator here at EGLE, and I am going to be kicking us off here today. So most of you are probably familiar with Zoom by this point in time, but just a few logistical details for you. First off, we are recording this webinar and we will email you with access to the recording after the event. So if you are a teacher and you want to share this with other classes or with another teacher friend, or just want to watch it again at your leisure because you loved it so much, you will be able to do that. We'll make sure you have the recording. All lines are muted during this event, and if you have questions, we encourage you to submit those using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to answer questions live, and whatever we don't get to, we'll try to make sure that you have access to information to help answer your questions in the future. So we will answer questions at the end of the presentation, so don't worry if it doesn't get answered right away. And teachers, if you're streaming this to a classroom, we would absolutely love to hear from your students. So feel free to take questions from them and type them in the chat for us or into the Q&A for us. The chat is disabled, so you'll hear from us via the chat, but you won't be able to chat to others that way. One quick note before we get started, this is brought to you by EGLE's Environmental Education Program, and we have a lot of resources available for students and teachers and individuals and families to learn all about environmental quality in Michigan and the work that EGLE does to protect the environment and public health. That's on our EGLE Classroom website. I encourage you to check that out. We also have a lot of wraparound resources specifically for educators to help deepen students' learning around the topics we'll be talking about today. We did send out a student viewing guide or worksheet prior to the webinar for you to use to help students follow along. And we'll drop that in the chat in case you missed it and you want to take a look at it. And you can use that or not use it as you see fit to help your students engage with the presentation. And let's see what's next. And now we're up to the fun stuff. So I don't want to take up too much time. I want to have us celebrate the environment and the work that we're all doing to protect it. So we're grateful that you're here today. We're grateful that you took your time out of your day to learn about what we're doing and how you can be involved. So we'll have 3 speakers today on our webinar, and it will be moderated by our very own fearless leader, Director Liesl Clark. She has been with EGLE since 2019, and she's led some really major initiatives within the department, including the development of our offices of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate, the Clean Water Public Advocate, and what we'll be talking about today, the Office of Climate and Energy. So I am thrilled to introduce our Director, Liesl Clark, and I will hand it over to her to get us going. Thanks, Liesl.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm so glad that we're doing this. We love to celebrate Earth Day at EGLE, and we like to do it in person, but when we have to use a webinar, we're going to use a webinar. So we're thrilled to be celebrating with you. You may know that 2022 is our 52nd anniversary of Earth Day, and actually Michigan was involved quite deeply in the very first Earth Day, but I won't go into that today because we do want to keep our focus on our presenters. We love to celebrate, but our staff work hard every day to meet our mission, which I always say to our team, our mission is simple, but our jobs are hard. Our mission is to protect Michigan's environment and public health through the management of air, water, land, and energy resources. Now, we are using EGLE a lot, just to make sure you know. EGLE is Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. There's no A, but we think everybody can handle the acronym. So this year for our celebration together, we're going to focus specifically on climate change, how it's impacting Michigan, what EGLE's doing to address the challenge, and how you all can make a difference. Climate change is a huge problem, and we all have to work together to face the challenges it brings. But we're already making progress against this really challenging problem, even though there's more to do together. We know that young people are such an important, creative, and passionate part of this work, and you all make a huge difference in your communities and in our state. So we're glad that you're here to talk about this important topic, and we know that working together, we can make a difference. We're interested in learning from all of you too, in making sure that we work together to collectively have an impact. So today you're going to hear from some of our awesome team. They're going to talk about what they're doing in their everyday jobs to address climate change. They'll talk about how their work's related to climate and the environment, which is pretty easy for our team because it's basically everybody and everything that we do. And they'll share some ways that you can get involved too. So you'll see that there's a lot of different ways to address climate change and a lot of opportunity to help move the needle. So some of you are already involved in taking care of your environment. So stay tuned at the end and we'll talk about the winners of our annual poster contest and environmental services awards. So we hope that this is just another inspiration for all of you to take action so that we can work together to protect Michigan's environment. We also hope you'll enjoy hearing about these different types of jobs that we have at our team, and maybe you'll even consider joining us one day. So our first speaker is Corey Connolly. He's the head of our Office of Climate and Energy, and he is going to talk about the My Healthy Climate Plan, which is Michigan's ambitious plan to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Corey's been instrumental in putting this work together, and he's going to share a bit about where we're going before we actually roll out the formal plan next week on Earth Day, April 22nd. So Corey, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Liesl, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. And make sure I get the right one here. There we go. So yeah, thanks, Liesl, for introducing me, and thanks everyone for joining. As she said, I lead the Office of Climate and Energy here at EGLE, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of background on climate change and Michigan and kind of how we're thinking about it at a very broad level. Other speakers will talk a little bit more detail, a little bit about the opportunities that kind of come with addressing climate change and how we're trying to figure out how to respond and how we can all respond together. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive into it. So on climate change, I think a lot of folks are pretty familiar with this concept, so I'll breeze past it pretty quickly. But the greenhouse gas effect and the general warming of the climate is very well established as fact. And you can see with this graphic, basically what's happening is typically a certain amount of, due to greenhouse gases, a certain amount of heat is trapped in the atmosphere to help keep our planet warm. And due to additional greenhouse gases that we're adding as humans, you can see on the right of this graphic, the greenhouse gas effect is being amplified, and that we're capturing more heat than we should, and it's resulting in a lot of negative impacts, and will result in even more if we don't take action immediately. So where are our greenhouse gas emissions coming from in Michigan? It's largely from power. So where our electricity comes from, light switches, anything that you're powering in your house, anything we're powering at businesses, also transportation, so cars, buses, planes, buildings in terms of how we heat our buildings, industry writ large, so manufacturing facilities, industrial processing facilities like cement and things like that, and then from our working lands, agriculture, et cetera. So that's a bit of a snapshot on that. What we're already seeing is that Michigan's going to face increased precipitation, so more snow and rain, frequent and intense storms, and higher temperatures. That's going to result in a lot of negative things, but this picture here is showing some of the flooding that we're already starting to see, but we'll see increased across Michigan as a result of climate change. So we're already seeing those impacts now, but we can expect to see them intensify into the future and get even worse if we don't manage to reduce some of our GHG emissions rapidly. So a few of that's sort of where we're at currently and some of the ways in which climate change is happening in Michigan. There are also some opportunities with addressing this challenge that are equally as important and also are somewhat exciting. So when it comes to health, climate action actually reduces pollution that otherwise can cause asthma and make it harder for folks to breathe. And we're already seeing that as we transition to cleaner sources of energy and cleaner transportation strategies. We're starting to see that the air is getting cleaner for people to breathe, and that's an added benefit of tackling climate change. Additionally, environmental justice is a concept, the idea that folks can have equal participation and representation and equal treatment under state policies and laws when it comes to the negative impacts of environmental systems on their livelihoods and on their lives, and also the positives that come with improved access to nature, improved air and water quality, et cetera. So that is something that we're also centering in a lot of our work here at EGLE and in the Office of Climate and Energy and in the My Healthy Climate Plan. And then finally, there's actually a lot of interesting, exciting opportunities when it comes to jobs. You can see here, these are folks out on a wind turbine. I don't know that all of the jobs are quite as exciting, but we have more than 110,000 clean energy jobs in Michigan already, and there are more to come. So what does carbon neutrality look like in Michigan? What is carbon neutrality? Carbon neutrality is, if you look back at that graphic I had before, it's making sure that we're not putting any more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere than we can sustain as a planet. And that results in, if we're putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that means we have to find somewhere else to get them out. And that's the goal by 2050, is that we're reaching that equilibrium. And in the interim, we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by about 52%, which is the target set out in the My Healthy Climate Plan, which I'll talk about in a second. But here are some of the other things that we think a carbon neutral Michigan can deliver: clean air, clean water, clean energy, transportation, healthy and efficient homes, healthy and affordable local food, and more. So how do we respond to climate change? That's the key question when we talk about the My Healthy Climate Plan. We have the opportunity to mitigate climate change, which is a term that means to stop or prevent climate change. I'm sure that there's a more sophisticated definition, but that's the one I've got. And that looks like things that we'll highlight in a second around increasing renewable energy, transitioning to electric vehicles, using more efficient lights, reducing our energy use, planting trees. And then there's climate adaptation. So accepting that some of the changes that we're seeing are already happening and are going to happen, and we need to prepare for those things. So that looks like disaster preparedness, making sure we're investing in roads and bridges, increasing green infrastructure, also planting trees and protecting natural wildlife systems that can help deal with increased flooding, et cetera. The important piece out of this slide is that the My Healthy Climate Plan actually focuses on mitigation. We're going to work on climate adaptation across the entirety of state government and EGLE, but in this particular plan, the one I'm talking about, the one that's going to be released on Earth Day, we're talking about how do we stop it or reduce the pace at which the climate is changing. So the My Healthy Climate Plan, again, the ultimate goal is carbon neutrality by 2050. It's been developed over the course of more than a year, even before I had this job, with meetings with people from all over Michigan, taking lots of public input and comments. And hopefully some of the folks on this call had a chance to send in comments as we went through that process. The plan is broken into major categories of action. The first one is around energy, and that includes key strategies around increasing renewable energy in Michigan's economy. So increasing the amount of energy that we get from wind and solar, reducing the amount of energy that we use. So reducing how often we're using lights at home, or making sure we're efficiently, washing our clothes, or whatever it is that we're using electricity for. And shutting down and reducing our usage of fossil fuels on the electric grid, all in tandem. And so reducing the coal plants that are causing that localized air pollution that we talked about before with health impacts, et cetera. So that's the first category, is around our energy system and our electric grid. The second is around transportation. So we have many vehicles on the road in Michigan. It's obviously a big part of our economy, and I think everybody on this call drives around often. Most of those vehicles burn gasoline, are called internal combustion engine vehicles, and we need to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road. And so the plan, the My Healthy Climate Plan, calls for us to get to 2 million electric vehicles, or the charging infrastructure to support those vehicles on the road by 2030. And then to also increase public transit and other transportation options. So riding your bike, sharing rides with people, hopping on the bus, all of those things reduce your carbon footprint and have the opportunity at scale to help us make sure that we're reducing emissions from the transportation sector. In the built environment, so in our homes and businesses, we're trying to figure out how to reduce the emissions coming from our existing buildings. So how do we heat our homes and reduce the energy usage there from existing buildings? How do we make them ready to have more advanced technologies like rooftop solar or batteries on site to capture the energy and store it for evenings or what have you? And then we're trying to make sure that we build new buildings that are more sustainably sourced in terms of products and use less energy generally. And then finally, of the categories that I'm going to highlight here, making sure that we're protecting Michigan's land and water, which is core to what EGLE does and what the state of Michigan is always trying to do. But that can also have major benefits for the climate, because trees and plants can help sequester or capture the carbon and reduce the emissions in the atmosphere. And it also helps us prepare for climate change impacts on adaptation, as we talked about. And that includes also things like investing in your local food system. That can also help when thinking about climate. And I think we'll talk about that more later. And then finally, a few things you can do, and we'll talk about this, I think, more, but a lot of the stuff I talked about, using less energy, switching to clean energy, planting trees, protecting nature, using less water, all of those things are things that we're hoping people can help us with as we try to implement the My Healthy Climate Plan that is focused on those areas of action that I talked about. So with that, I think I've gone 3 seconds over, Liesl. And I'll stop sharing.
That was fabulous, Corey. I didn't even see that you went 3 seconds over. It was great. So thank you for that overview. And I think that it's a really good table laying for the conversation that we're going to have. I think in Corey's description too, it's important to understand that statewide work that the government is doing and industries are doing. But if you all are like me, you're going to be thinking about what are individual actions that can be taken and how can I really make a difference. So our next speakers are going to talk to us a bit more about that individual action. So next, we're going to go to Mr. Aaron Hyday, who's going to talk about EGLE's composting programs. I'm really interested in composting myself. I know many of us do this at home. And when you think about the amount of methane that you're taking out of landfills through composting your food at home, it's really a huge difference. So I'm excited for Aaron's presentation. So Aaron, floor is yours.
Thanks, Liesl. Let me get this up here. Can you see my screen?
Looks great.
All right. So I wanted to talk today. First of all, I'm Aaron, and I run the compost program for EGLE. And I wanted to talk to you today about food waste and you. So the unfortunate fact is we send a lot of food to the landfill. The landfill is basically a big constructed hole in the ground that's where your trash goes. And a lot of food goes in there with it. There's a lot of numbers on my first slide here, but the important numbers are 30% or almost 1/3 of all of the landfill waste is actually food waste. There are a lot of organics that can be recovered, and that's what this little picture is here. But 30% is actually food waste. That's what's going to the landfill. And another way to think of that is here in the United States, we waste 40% of all food that is grown. So if you think of a farmer who's growing apples, for every 10 apples that he grows and sends off, 4 of those end up in the trash without even being eaten. So that's not good. When we waste a lot of food, we lose the resources and everything that go into it, and we lose the energy that was put into it. So what can we do? Well, we have this thing here called the food recovery hierarchy. It's a upside down pyramid that basically at the top of it is the best things that we can do, and all the way down to the worst things that we can do. We're going to go through it real quick. So, oh, there we go. My computer's lagging a little bit. I live in the country and I have bad internet. So first thing we can do is just waste less. This is called source reduction, and food waste happens at all steps of the supply chain. So, it could be left in the field, incorrectly processed, thrown away at a grocery store, or thrown away in your household because you didn't need it. And we need to waste less by not overproducing too much food, reducing processed waste. Basically, when they get the food to you, make it more efficient. And then also encourage the sale of imperfect foods. And if you wonder what that is, I grow a lot of tomatoes, and sometimes tomatoes will grow like a little finger or what looks like a nose off of them. And that's perfectly fine to eat still. But you won't see those at the store because it's imperfect. It doesn't look like the tomato that you're supposed to see. So they don't even get that at the store for you to eat. What can you do to reduce food waste? Well, only purchase what you're going to need. Don't buy so much that, it goes bad and then you don't end up eating it and you end up throwing it away. Rotate the foods in and out of your pantry and fridge, just cycle through it, make sure it's getting eaten. Eat the food on your plate. If you remember one thing from my presentation, the most important thing that you can do is eat the food on your plate. It took a lot of time and energy and resources to get that food to you. Eat it. Talk to your parents about getting creative with leftovers, and also to be aware of use by, sell by, and best by dates. A lot of people think that those dates on food are expiration dates, and they're not. They just mean peak freshness, and in a lot of cases, the food's still fine beyond those dates. And then again, eat imperfect foods, because even though it might not look like a picture perfect type of food, it's probably still edible. Second thing on the hierarchy is feed people. So if you're not going to eat it, there are other folks who could probably use it. So many foods that can be donated can go to food banks, food pantries, soup kitchens, and other organizations. Grocery stores donate large amounts of food because they have those sell-by dates. They rotate food in and out. But even at your school, you can start a share table, which is something where if you get hot lunch and you have prepackaged foods that maybe you took it and you say, you know what, I'm actually really not that hungry for it. You can place it on a share table, and someone else who is hungry for it can actually go over and claim it and eat it. There are actually a lot of foods that can even be donated from your school. So what can you do to feed people? Well, again, eat the food that you take because you are people. So when we say feed people, eat it. That's the most important thing. But also, again, be aware of use by, sell by, best by dates, because you can donate a lot of foods even though they're beyond those dates. You can donate food from your home or even school. You can start a share table like we talked about, or you can organize a food drive and encourage people in your food drive to get into their pantry and look for those things that maybe they haven't quite eaten, can still be donated. But what if people just can't eat it? Like, I don't really think I can give this to a person to eat. Well, there's still plenty of options that we have to keep that stuff out of the landfill, like feeding animals. So there's a picture there. That's typical animal feed that they feed pigs and turkeys at a farm. And many foods can actually be turned into animal feed. If it's recovered and handled properly, it can be fed directly or processed first. Basically, anything that's made from vegetables or grain materials can go towards feeding animals. Staying away from meats. We don't like feeding animals to other animals, but vegetables and grain materials can go straight in, right back into the food chain. Here in Michigan, we have a really cool company in Battle Creek, which takes all the cereals, almost all the cereals that you can think of that you eat. Sometimes they might not, something might go wrong, and that food, well, they're not going to box it up and send it to you, but they'll give it to this company called Reconserve in Battle Creek. And I've actually seen large piles of turkey feed that were pink from all the Fruit Loops and Fruity Pebbles that went into making that feed. And it went right back into the food chain. And that's better than send it to the landfill. We can also create energy from the food that would have gone to the landfill, because food is energy. It's carbon, water, and the energy that went into making it just in that form of food. When it goes to a landfill, those resources are lost and methane is created, which is a bad greenhouse gas. Food waste materials can go into something like what's called an anaerobic digester. That's the picture that's here. And it's basically just a giant metal stomach, just like your stomach. The food and food waste goes in, and it creates a bunch of gas and heat. And the heat and the gas can actually be collected to create electricity to power your home. And the gas can actually go towards heating your home. And all of this will reduce our carbon footprint. Also, out these things comes a whole bunch of things that can be used for fertilizers that can replace chemical fertilizers, which improves soil quality and water quality. That's really important here in Michigan. And then composting. This is where a lot of microbes lies in composting. And composting is basically microbes, bacteria, all those little tiny microscopic things that we can't see, breaking down organic matter and turning it back into soil. When we compost our food waste, it keeps it out of the landfill, reduces carbon in the atmosphere through carbon sequestration. It can be used in place of chemical fertilizers, again, which is good for our soil and water quality. And again, will reduce carbon footprint overall. This is a commercial compost site here in this picture, but you can also compost at home or even at your school. Pick a spot. You can either buy or build a composting bin. You can take food scraps, blend them with leaves or wood chips, and over time, they will get broken down back into soil. You can use it in gardens or on the lawn or what have you. And if you don't have a backyard, you could still get something that's called a worm tower. I have one in my basement, full of worms. I feed them all sorts of banana peels and the cores of apples, and my kids get done eating them. And they absolutely love that stuff. And I get a nutrient-rich soil as a benefit out of it. And then at the bottom of our pyramid, our last resort is the landfill. There are some things that just have to go to the landfill for certain reasons that is unavoidable. Some landfills still can capture gas off of there to produce energy and heat and make electricity, but unfortunately, there's not as efficient. So landfills create a lot of methane gas, which is significant greenhouse gas. And they also produce leachate, which is a very toxic liquid that they have to handle very carefully. And then remember, when we put our food in the landfill, the energy and the resources that went into making all of that food are lost. So try to remember the hierarchy, and you can go to our website and find all sorts of materials. Encourage your parents and your teachers. Waste less, feed people, feed animals, maybe get into a program where you can create energy or compost at home. Try not to put things in the landfill. And so that's my time. I think I'm a little bit over, but thank you, and happy Earth Day to everybody.
That was great, Aaron. Thank you so much. And I think, really great examples of ways that you can make a difference yourself. I guess I got to tell my kids, maybe we'll get a worm tower in our basement. My son's always growing things. He's got grow lights and vegetables in his room so that he can get them outside and into the garden. So now we're going to talk about how we can make a difference when we're looking at our environment around us and understand the things that we can learn from our environment. So we've got Mr. Jack Cotrin from our EQA, our Environmental Quality Analyst in our Water Resources Division, and he works in our Warren District office. So Jack's going to tell us about our time-traveling fish to help us learn about climate change and how it affects our lakes and streams, and some ways that you really can make a difference when you're interacting with nature. So I'm really looking forward to the time-traveling fish. So with that, Jack, take it away.
Thanks, Liesl. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about something that's very important to me, and that is water quality in our rivers, lakes, and streams here in Michigan. The title of my presentation today is Keeping It on the Land. And the reason for that is because my goal today is to show you how what we do on the land actually has the potential to impact water quality in rivers and streams, and also how climate change is changing that story. But before we can start talking about climate change, hold on, I gotta advance the slides here. There we go. Before we can start talking about climate change, we need to understand a very important concept in water management, and that is this idea of a watershed. And a watershed is just an area of land that drains precipitation like rain or snow to a common point such as a river, stream, or lake. And these are all across our landscape. We can divide the entire state of Michigan up into watersheds. And that means every one of you lives in a watershed, and we all share the responsibility of using the land in a way to protect water quality. You can kind of think of it like a bunch of big bowls in the landscape that all drain water to the same place at the bottom of the bowl. And anything that is carried in that water will make its way into our rivers and streams. And so we call that water that's moving over the landscape stormwater runoff, or sometimes just runoff. And if we have too much of it, it can be a problem because it's carrying pollutants with it into our rivers and lakes. And we call those types of pollution non-point sources of pollution. And in order to understand how non-point sources of pollution work, I always say the best way to learn about what's going on in the water and what the water quality is to look at the critters that actually live in the water. So we're going to meet a very special fish today. This is the red-side dace, and it's very important to the story of water quality where I work down in Southeast Michigan. And that's because it's a state endangered species. It actually only lives in 3 different river systems statewide. And that's because it's really, really sensitive to changes in water quality. And so as a result, this is what we call an indicator species, which means its abundance, presence, or absence tells us about the health of the environment it lives in. So if red-side dace disappear from a stream, that's a red flag for water quality. And as Liesl mentioned, just for today, we're going to pretend that this particular red-side dace on the slide here, I'm going to call him RSD for short. We're going to pretend that he has the ability to travel through time, and we're going to follow him on a journey throughout our history in Michigan and see how our land use has affected the water quality in the streams where he likes to live. So he's going to take off on a trip back in time and rematerialize here in Southeast Michigan long before European settlement, hundreds of years ago. And you can see the landscape is dominated by forests and wetlands. And the stream here is basically a red-side dace paradise. There's lots of pebbles down here at the bottom of the riverbed, which is where the fish like to lay their eggs and where the insects that they like to eat hang out. There's also lots of vegetation on the stream bank, which provides shade and shelter and keeps the water cool, basically making a perfect habitat for these fish. But what's really important for today and for the story of climate is what's going on with the rain that's falling on the landscape over here. You can see some of that is running off over the surface, but not very much. And it's not carrying pollution with it. And most of it is being absorbed up by these vegetation and by wetlands, which basically act like big sponges on the landscape. But most of the water has the opportunity to infiltrate into the ground, to sink down underneath the ground, which basically acts like a big filter, slows the water down, it filters out pollutants, and it's able to slowly make its way back to the stream, where by the time it enters through the groundwater, it's cold, it's clean, and it's full of dissolved oxygen, which is what these fish need to breathe. And so you can see RSD's current mood here, vibing and thriving. He's loving life, hanging out with all his fish friends, but he's curious and wants to see what things are like in the future. So he's going to go ahead and jump forward maybe a few decades, a few hundred years, maybe into the future to Southeast Michigan after European settlement, when we started to use the land for agriculture, for row crops and livestock. Now this changes the water quality story. Agriculture compacts the soil, which prevents water from infiltrating into the ground. So we have a greater amount of runoff. And that runoff now carries pollutants with it. These can be things like sediments, pesticides, fertilizers, or even manure, which obviously is not good for water quality in the creek. And so you can see here, the water has actually changed to a greenish color. That's from excess algae growth due to loading of nutrients from fertilizers and manure. And that reduces the dissolved oxygen in the stream. And as a result, the fish get stressed out, and we can see the population of red-side dace here is a little bit lower. So what's RSD's current mood now? Well, he's surviving, but not thriving. So I think he's gonna take a trip into the future and see if things have gotten a little bit better. Spoiler alert, they haven't. This is what most of Southeast Michigan looks like today. It's a heavily urbanized landscape. We've taken a lot of our forests and farms and turned them into cities with roads, buildings, parking lots. These are what we call impervious surfaces, places that don't let water infiltrate into the ground. So in these areas, we have a lot more runoff, and that runoff is carrying with it new pollutants, things like oils, grease, road salts. Now, some of that water does go into a storm sewer and into the sewer system. The water that goes into the sewer system isn't like water that infiltrates into the ground. It's a lot warmer, it's moving a lot faster, and it still carries pollutants with it. So when we get a big rainstorm, all of that water washes out into the stream at the same time, and it makes the river really flashy, meaning the water level comes up really high, water moves really quickly, and then drops down really fast. And that actually modifies the channel itself. And you may have noticed the stream channel here looks a little bit different. It's become eroded, it's disconnected from its floodplain. And there's actually sediment from the eroded channel that's filling in the spaces in between those rocks that the red-side dace need to lay their eggs and find their food. And so as you can see, we're down to just a single red-side dace here on his own with our friend saying, what the heck happened here? This is not what I signed up for on my trip through time. So he's gonna take one more big gamble and take a big leap forward in time and see what the far future looks like. Now, we can't say for sure what the future will look like, but one thing we do know is that climate change is going to make things a lot more complicated. Even if we improve the way we manage our watersheds, we still are going to be fighting an uphill battle thanks to the changes that climate brings. So as our red-side dace friend heads off into the future, we're going to take a quick look at how climate change is impacting the water cycle. And Corey already touched on this, but the biggest impact on the water cycle from climate change is that warmer temperatures lead to more evaporation, which leads to more water available to fall as precipitation when conditions are right. And this is something we've been observing already here in Michigan, more intense rainfall and more frequent intense storms. And that's a trend that's projected to continue in the future, regardless of what we do to fight climate change. There will still be some impact, and we expect that even under lower emissions scenarios, we're going to be living in a wetter world, and we need to learn to adapt to that. And of course, more precipitation means more stormwater runoff, which has serious implications for water quality. A lot of our infrastructure isn't built to handle these large rain events, which can result in floodings or sewer backups. It can result in things like dam failures, which may be triggered by large rain events, or in big cities like Detroit and Lansing, where the sanitary sewer, what gets flushed down your toilet, is combined with the storm sewer, what falls from the sky. If we get a big enough storm, the sewer doesn't have the capacity to handle that, and we have untreated sewage that overflows into the river in what's called the combined sewer overflow, which is a pretty nasty problem. And of course, the volume of runoff is increased, the flashiness in the stream gets worse, and we have a higher risk of pollutants in runoff. So basically, all of those things I could take from the present day slide get magnified in a future scenario by climate change. So as we arrive in the future here, we're calling this the darkest timeline where humans haven't done anything to adapt to climate change. Things aren't great. We might have flying cars in future cities, but our sewers are backing up. The river's at a flood stage. We maybe have a combined sewer overflow, lots of erosion and siltation, and our red-side dace does not know what's going on. He needs to get out of here fast and find a better timeline. Thankfully, though, that timeline might be possible, and there are a lot of tools at our disposal, both at the department and for you at home, that you can use to help combat these issues and adapt to the reality of a wetter world from climate change. I'm not going to focus on all of the regulations that exist, but just understand that at the Water Resources Division, we have a lot of tools that we can use under the law to help adapt and protect our water resources from the impacts of climate change. But I do want to talk about what my program at the department does, the NonPoint Source program. And this is for people who want to go above and beyond the letter of the law to protect our water resources from climate change. And what we do is we make watershed management plans that identify the challenges of water management in each unique watershed. And then we fund solutions that local groups can use to help protect waters from climate change. So as an example, in an urban watershed that had a lot of impervious surfaces, we might use a green infrastructure strategy, something like this bioswale here, where water that would normally run along the curb of the street and go into the storm drain instead can enter into this bioswale and get filtered into the ground, basically mimicking what the natural environment would have done years before European settlement occurred. And we can actually design these practices to be big enough to account for those larger flows that we see and will anticipate as a result of climate change. So this was just one example of a project that the department funded in Plymouth, Michigan with a group called Friends of the Rouge River. This map on the left, basically all of those green areas used to be places where water would flow directly into the sewer system, but now we've replaced those areas with large rain gardens where water can flow along the curb into the gardens and infiltrate into the ground. And you can actually do versions of this at your own home on a smaller scale. The key thing you want to do is stop your home's runoff from going into the storm drain. So if you have gutter downspouts that go into your driveway or into the street, instead you can reroute them like this photo here in the upper right so that they go into the grass or into a garden. Or if you really want to go the extra mile, you could make your own rain garden, basically a smaller scale of what we did in Plymouth. And there are a lot of tools and resources out there that we have to help you do this and find the right place to site it and which plants you should use to help treat the water. You could even install a rain barrel, which basically lets you capture and reuse the rainwater that comes from your gutters to water your gardens or your plants. There's also a lot of really simple things that you can do to not contribute to non-point source pollution, to keep the land clean and the runoff cleaner. In the winter, you can use less road salt or find alternatives to salt, like using sand for traction, picking up after your pets, or not using man-made fertilizers on your lawn can all help with the water quality problems. But I think one of the best things to do is to get involved with a local watershed group as a volunteer. These are things like watershed councils, alliances, and friends of groups that do things like volunteer stream cleanups, volunteer monitoring, storm drain labeling projects to remind people the impact their activities can have on water quality. They have tools and resources to help you build rain gardens and pick the right native plants, and sell those plants in many cases. And they also have school programs to help get involved in the classroom. So many opportunities to learn. And there are dozens of these groups across the state. So I included a link there to a list of these watershed groups. And if you want to find where your local group is, that's a good place to start. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out to them and find what opportunities they have to get involved. So I just want to conclude with an alternate timeline, a much better timeline than the last one our fish went to, where we've implemented a lot of these strategies I've discussed. We're now using green infrastructure and rain gardens to capture water from impervious surfaces, and we've restored the river back to its natural state. But you'll notice we're still able to use our cities, access our parking lots, and also access and enjoy nature while not disturbing the organisms that live in the river and protecting water quality. And if we do our part at EGLE on the regulatory side and with the grants, and if you all do your part at home with some of the simple strategies that I mentioned here, I think this type of future really is possible even under the higher precipitation that we expect with a changing climate. So thank you all so much. There's my contact info there on the left. If you ever want to reach out and have questions about this stuff, I'm more than happy to talk. And here's some links to some good resources on the right.
That was so great, Jack. Thank you so much. And I think that, we're all really interested in seeing that last version of the future and playing our part in making that happen. So I really appreciate the way you connected and what people can do themselves. And, I hope what you've heard from us today is how important what you do is in all of this, because you are critical and the actions that you take really do make a difference. So I think we're right up against time. We had some really good questions and our team has worked to answer those to those of you that asked. So hopefully you get all your questions answered. But I just want to say how grateful I am, first of all, to all of you for participating. We are going to record this and it's going to be available in case you want to share with others or want to go back and check again and just look at some of the things our presenters shared. I also want to say just a huge thank you to the EGLE team for putting this together. You can tell that this group is really excited about the work that we do and that we know that you are the future and we do this work every day for you. We do this for your kids and your grandkids, and we're really excited to do it with you too. So please check out EGLE Classroom for other activities that can go along with the webinar. That'll help deepen your learning and give you a better understanding of what we talked about. Sign up for our EGLE Classroom newsletter if that's something you might be interested in. The website's michigan.gov/EGLE Classroom, EGLE. And let me also say that there's lots of materials about the things that we talked about on a couple other websites. So let me tell you, michigan.gov/climate and energy, michigan.gov/environmental justice, michigan.gov/water. So go check out michigan.gov/EGLE EGLE. And we'd love to hear from you and appreciate your time here today. So with that, Eileen, anything else we need to do as wrap up?
No, I think we are all set. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. We're so happy that you were here and lots of great questions. If your question wasn't answered and you just have a burning desire to hear it, feel free to send us an email at egleclassroom@michigan.gov and we will make sure you get connected to your answers. But check out the website and we look forward to working with you all in the future. Have a great Earth Day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.